This is my first time reviewing a fantasy book in this channel, and in today's video I'll be talking about one of the most important releases this month, The Winds and Truth, written by Brandon Sanderson, the fifth book in the Stormlight Archive, and the conclusion from the first half of the Stormlight Archive. This is one of the most important releases of Brandon Sanderson's career. Maybe one of the most important releases in this series. And this book, without a doubt, was the most fantasy book I've ever read. The most fantastical book I've ever read. This book uses nearly every type of fantasy subjects and does some few original things with them. Magical powers, magical technologies, mythological beings, gods, fantastical creatures, time manipulation, vision, alternative realm and dimension, and fantastical races, etc. And I'm not going to lie, this is Brandon Sanderson's bread and butter as an author. And the level of vision, ambition and imagination he's shown here is quite magnetic. There are certain parts of the book I wasn't really interested in, characters or plot or whatever, but the sheer amount of fantastical content on the page keep me hooked from beginning to end. I was particularly impressed by the fact that it is so much in breadth of content, so much bigger in scope. If you are a cosmere aware, if you are aware of many cosmere references, you're going to have a feast on this book. But if you're not aware of many references, there's still a lot of richness for you to dig into, particularly with the mythology that Brandon Sanderson has built. If I have to give rating for this book for world building and magic alone, I would give it 3 out of 5 stars. It is good, but there are some flaws in there, but not too big that it ruins your imagination. The biggest problem in this book is the bloat. Pacing and plot is Stormlight Archive's greatest enemy. Bloat is a word that thrown around a lot when Rhythm of War came out, and to a lesser degree with the Oathbringer. And I couldn't agree more. Both of these books has an entire section that I felt like needed a harder editing, in particularly in Oathbringer Part 4 and in Rhythm of War Part 2 and 3. Wind and Truth is weird in this regard. Instead of being structured in Part 5 with 3 or 4 interludes in between each part, this book is structured in 10 days with 2 interludes between each part. On one hand, this structure is actually quite effective at creating a sense of urgency as we are counting down the ending. But on the other hand, Sanderson is juggling so many different POVs in this book and is deciding to do them simultaneously, which means that we are getting 5 different storylines with 10 to 15 POV, each advancing at an inch of a time to cover miles of ground. You know how at the end of the Stormlight book or any Sanderson book, especially in Stormlight, Sanderson start a POV jumping fanatically to build excitement and momentum. Now imagine that for the whole book. It's not terrible, but honestly for something this long, I feel like that that is not really a sustainable type of storytelling, and it really holds some of the moments and scenes back from really hitting compared to what you're getting from scenes of particular storyline very close together. Because as it stands, you might reach a moment just before a dramatic scene in one storyline, then just go explore four others before returning to the first one in an hour or two later. And yeah, this book suffers the same bloat problem as the previous two installments did. This is especially true in the first half of the book generally, where there are a number of scenes that seems to exist more to show off quippy dialogue or fan service than anything else. But there are some storylines in this book I wish were cut back or either relegated in handful of interludes or novella, for example. For example, one of the storylines is actually a romance between two characters, and it is really actually well written romance, one of the Sanderson's better ones in my opinion. But in this book it just feels like a fan service storyline, and I can't help but feel like if you took it out along with one or two major POV characters, the story would simply feel more tight and focused. Still, I do recognize the value of having a light-hearted storyline in the midst of chaos and misery everywhere else. On a quick spoiler, to be clear, I don't have a problem with the fact that it is a gay relationship. In fact, I am extremely thrilled to see a great gay representation with Renarin and Relene. Also, obviously, I'm not a writer, so take this with a bit of a grain of salt. But I just kept thinking both Dalinar and Shallan's storyline could have been stronger if she would have been Dalinar and Navani then hanging out with Renarin and Relene. All this criticism aside, however, the second half of the book really pops off. The pacing is energetic, the storyline is exciting, and the pages flies by. I am not the one to value strong endings over strong middle ones, but in this case, it is full 50% of the book that is stronger than the first 50%. Like the final 50% of the book is far stronger than the first half. So I would say it does recover from the stumbling in the first half. It doesn't have quite as wrapped up of an ending as I'd hoped for, but it wraps up well enough that I feel pretty satisfied, and the ending was good. Overall, I would give it a 3 out of 5. One of the biggest problems of Sanderson's writing, and especially in recent Stormlight Archives outings, is that the problem with its dialogue and the tone of the stories. I read this book with a bunch of my friends in Discord chat group, and one thing one of my friends said really stuck with me. Sanderson seems to have decided that quippy dialogue is an acceptable substitute for well-written character interactions. Quippy dialogue is something Sanderson has increasingly aggravated towards in recent years. It is the MCU problem that I am finding very much an issue rooted with some of the recent outings. Honestly, I feel like it is rather dumbed down some of the potential richness of the storyline that is possible here. I mean, we are dealing with some huge themes here, like redemption, imperialism, free will, etc. But the characters are just kind of joking their way through it, which makes it lose some gravitas. It also wouldn't be as much of a problem if the quips felt like they are coming from a place really rooted in character. Like, Joe Abercrombie's dialogue is funny as hell, but the humor is really rooted in character from that universe. The problem with Sanderson here is that most of the quips that are made really could just be moved from one character to the next, and it really wouldn't make much of a difference because they are more there to entertain the audience than to express the character. There is certainly some notable exceptions to this. For example, pattern telling. Shallan, she's abysmal at statistics and maths when she says that she kills all her mentor and people she loves. But a lot of it is very shallow. The MCU ran into same problem as well. This type of Marvel quippy dialogue makes perfect sense for Tony Stark's character. It makes a lot less sense once everyone else starts doing it too. The first Avenger found an okay balance, but Avenger Age of Ultron flew off the cliff with this. All that being said, there's some genuinely touching interaction in this book, but I didn't completely hate it. But overall, I thought the book was really bad at this, but these moments brought it back a bit for me. Some few genuine moments redeems the book completely in my opinion. Not fully, but acceptable. One of the most disappointing and the lowest point of the book is the mental health representation that Sanderson has done in recent years. I think the mental health stuff is emblematic or a problem I have vaguely had with Sanderson since reading The Way of Kings, which is that I really don't think he quite understands change, particularly social change. You can see this if you look at how he writes about history and politics in general, but it also applies to science. His characters often make sweeping changes to the social order, Elend and Yasna in particular, and then faces only a nominal resistance to that change. In real life, the transition from absolutist monarchy to fledgling liberal democracy took decades and thousands upon thousands of lives, requiring a complete philosophical change to the philosophy of the governmental legitimacy. But in Brandon Sanderson's book, these sweeping political changes occur with a stroke of a pen, and essentially nobody, not even the nobility, had the problem with it. These changes also occur without any kind of intermediate steps or evolution of the ideology. Yasna, who lives in a world with no democracies and is herself a monarch, somehow has fully developed a republican ideology. Where did these ideas even coming from? And the end state of that change, coincidentally the same state we have been in Earth, is treated as inevitable. Weirdly, characters who would have had resistance to change just don't, with lifelong monarchists like Dalinan just shrugging it at the sudden end of the Atelier monarchs. Basically, all the characters in Sanderson's work are secret 21st century Earth pretending to live in a fantasy world. And the moment the world becomes more like ours, their morality and understanding of the world instantly updates to accept this new change. Everyone in Atlketar, like I don't know how to pronounce, Atlketar secretly knows slavery is wrong and everyone is happy when it's gone, despite most of the nobility being deeply attached to it. Nobody at the ghost side is a bad person by our moral standards by Oathbringer. That's just not how societies work. There is always resistance to social change, even when it is completely and objectively good. This applies to mental health too. Kaladin, with minor assistance from WIT, covers decades of progress in mental health in just a few weeks, and this is just so happens to invent a similar system to the one we use in real life. The swiftness and perfection of that change, as well as the fact that it faces no resistance from the established health system, really makes it feel cheap and fake. The same applies to a lot of sweeping social changes Sanderson writes about. This is why I roll my eyes when people say that Sanderson is a great world builder. All of his world are paper thin. The Alethi all acts like Klingon-esque honorable warriors. The Thalens are all merchants. The Hazardians are all barely not a caricature of Latinos. The Aziz are all bookish and mannered scribes, etc. These people have seemingly always been like this outside of a few designated exceptions, and even the designated exceptions are defined by the exact opposite of what their culture is supposed to be. These societies can't be deep because they are not a three-dimensional group of people with contradictory desires competing for resources. They are at most an assemblage of three personality traits. There is the illusion of depth early on, but the more you dig into things, the more the flatness of the facade is exposed. One of the most baffling moments I've ever read in a book is in A Rhythm of War, where Yasna just turns to the camera and says secular liberal democracy is the best form of democracy, and that once the war ends, she will implement it. This is one woman who hasn't been even remotely involved in politics up until very recently at that point. Single-handedly advanced the political theory from 13th century to 18th century in one monologue. And Dalliner reacts to this with mild dismissiveness. Imagine telling a European feudal overlord in 1300 that his atheist liberal republican asexual niece wants to abolish his monarchy and replace it with republic. Imagine telling that to a 13th century peasants that information. There is no gradual shift over generations, no systemic reformations, no competing interest groups to balance, just pulling the big lever leveled as modernize the country in 21st Earth standard. I'm not even sure Sanderson understand why democracies formed in the first place. It wasn't because an enlightened despot said, Hey, wouldn't it be a great idea if we all had the right to vote the guy in charge? And the nobility just kind of shrug and let it happen. Despite Sanderson's doing that exact bit in both Mistborn and Stormlight, the politics being so bad wouldn't be an issue. A lot of the stories have people defined by loose stereotypes, and it works out just fine. But it's such a big pillar in Delaney's character arc and therefore the themes of the series that it's just impossible to ignore. That's my problem with Sanderson's world building. The world building of his books are extremely toyetic, always has been. He doesn't have much interest in exploring the structures of society or the psychology of how people respond to that change, as much as he is interested in moving his action figures across the barren plane of imagination. I'm always extremely baffled by the truism that and the claims that he's a quote-unquote great world builder. Overall, this book is such a mixed bag. It was a step up for me over Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, which both of those got 2 stars from me in Goodreads. But it is not returning to the heights of Words of Radiance, which I was hoping for. One thing I can say that his book is definitely fun. This is definitely a good thing for some people, but for me it's kind of a mixed bag. Don't get me wrong, I love fun books, but when I started reading Way of Kings, I didn't like it because it was fun. I liked it because it was somewhat somber and serious. It had its fun moments, but on a whole, it was a serious book about a serious situation. Words of Radiance was intentionally lighter. Oathbringer was intentionally darker, but the Rhythm of War and Winds and Truth, I feel like the story has fully taken on the MCU side like tone, where even when things get serious, we are going to use poop jokes and terrible humor with light-hearted storylines to make sure they were never becomes too serious. And I don't know, I like that. I kinda wish we stuck with more serious approach from the first 3 books of the Stormlight Archive. This is definitely one of the worst written books in this series. And I hope Sanderson took a break after this and really reflect on his career and his writing style. But hey, I still enjoyed it, but overall I would give it a 2.5 out of 5. It's below average in my opinion, and one of the most disappointing release of the series.